Hi, this is Mario Iglesias with Head First Baseball. I want to talk to you today about the three most important elements of pitching. Specifically, it's interesting to look at how those three elements change when you go from being a very young pitcher to a more experienced pitcher. So the three elements that we want to talk about, I'm going to use the whiteboard to write it down. The first one, in no order of value or anything like that, although we're going to get into that, the first one is, you guessed it, velocity. Again, not sure that you can see this on the board. We have velocity as number one. Number two is movement. Now, velocity is pretty easy to understand, throwing hard. Just a fastball, having a quality fastball. The second one, movement. Movement can be a two-seamer, which has run or has sink. It can also be a curveball. It can be changeup. Anything that has movement, we're going to just put all of that under the category of movement. The last one is command. And really, we're going to say command. Another synonym for command is going to be control. So basically, the three elements of pitching are velocity, movement, and command. Now, when you're young, we try to look and go, okay, a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old, what's the most important element at those young ages? Then what's the second most important, and what's the third most important? For those young pitchers, it's interesting that we would say the first most important for a young pitcher would be velo. Does a guy throw hard? The 11 or 12-year-old that can throw really hard usually has a lot of success. He has a good, strong arm. Coaches want to use him on the mound. They put him out there. They end up developing, learning how to pitch. Also, young hitters a lot of times have fear, especially fear of getting hit, fear of the fastball. So the young pitchers with high velo is usually a very important thing for young guys. The second most important is movement. So movement for a young pitcher, for example, if a guy has a curveball when he's 10, 11, or 12 years old, hitters are not very experienced. They don't see it very often, and you can get away without having the great velocity if you have movement. Conversely, and interestingly, if you don't have command as a young pitcher, if you have velocity and or movement, sometimes you're going to be just fine, a lot of the times. Example, a good 11 or 12-year-old pitcher goes, first guy throws gas, strikes him out. Second guy, he walks. Let's say he steals second because the pitcher doesn't really know how to hold runners yet. He's young. Next guy, he strikes out because he's hard to hit. He has high velocity, or he has a really good breaking ball. So even though he doesn't have command, he walks the second guy of the inning, gets a couple strikeouts, walks another guy or two. So he can walk 2 or 3 guys an inning in some cases and strike everybody out because they can't hit him very well because he has high velocity and he has movement. So again, for the young guys, we would go velocity, then movement, then command. What's interesting as you get older, let's call older beyond high school, the last half of high school and then beyond, the most important aspect, and really going into college baseball or professional baseball, the most important is command. At that point, you have to have command. You have to be able to throw strikes. Hitters get better, so the premium is on who can throw strikes. This is in order to have success at these levels. The second most important, as you get older, is movement. So regardless of whether or not you throw hard, if you have good command and if you have movement, so if you can put a fastball, even though it may not be the best fastball, if you can move it around the plate and go in or out to a hitter, maybe change up or down in the zone, and then if you can have a second pitch, which is a good changeup or a good breaking ball, so if you have good command and good movement, you're going to be just fine. Now, the least important part is velocity, which is interesting because for young pitchers, we identified velocity as being the most important, and then as you get older, it probably is least important. So how does this relate to us developing pitchers? Well, we all want to throw harder, and the question we get is, how can my son throw harder? In reality, what we want to say is, how can I encourage my son to have better biomechanics or more repeatable form so that he can throw more strikes and have better command? Then, can you teach him a second pitch? Can you teach him a changeup that he can throw low in the zone? So he throws a lot of strikes, which means hitters are going to swing a lot off of him. their contact rate is probably going to go up, so how can we add some deception with a changeup or breaking ball? And then most important, or then least important, in order to be a good pitcher in the long run, would be velocity. We do want to throw harder, not necessarily as a function of just being a good pitcher, and this is where it gets really interesting, because most guys, if you ask them, what's your goal in baseball? My goal is the major leagues, or my goal is professional baseball, not really understanding that there are many steps within professional baseball. Or maybe my goal is college baseball. Now the interesting thing is, in order to get to those post-high school goals, what's the most important thing? We go back into velo. They're recruiting based on velocity. In other words, if you don't have velocity, it's going to be really hard to get seen. The second most important would be command. So you want to be able to throw strikes, and if you throw hard, that's great. You don't have to come in, and we don't have to teach you how to throw hard. If you can throw a lot of strikes, and if you're a good pitcher, that's great, because it's really hard to teach command. And then the third most important at this point would be movement. And again, the idea is if you have velocity or command, then we can maybe teach you how to put some sync on it, teach you a secondary pitch, a curveball or a slider, and how to use it. So again, in review, velocity, movement, and command, the three elements of pitching. For young pitchers out there, you want to be developing not just in one area at the exclusion of the others, but ideally you would be trying to gain more velocity. You would be by doing strength training and or throwing programs that are specific to velocity training. Ideally, you are working on movement as you work on your form to gain better command, and you work on your mechanics. Then it's going to help you to be more repeatable in the zone, and then you can manipulate your action on your finger by adding cut to the ball, by adding run to the ball, or maybe getting on top of a ball and adding some action that goes down in the zone to create better movement. And you put all of them together, and then you have a pitcher that is really desirable for coaches, because ideally they have good command, they have plus movement, and they also have velocity. I hope you enjoyed talking pitching today, and we'll see you soon.